September 11th, 2001 feels like it was yesterday for Joe Ditmar. He was in New York City on business for one day only and seated on the 105th floor of the World Trade Center's South Tower when a hijacked plane hit the first tower. It feels like it was yesterday in some ways, and in other ways, it feels like it's been forever, he said. The 61-year-old has been in the insurance industry for 42 years and said it wasn't unusual to be called to the World Trade Center in his line of work. When a hijacked plane hit the first tower, he said he didn't hear or see anything from the 105th floor. All we saw was a flicker of lights, Ditmar said. The room he was in was surrounded by 4 walls, no windows. At that point, he, along with the 54 others in the room, were told to evacuate because of an explosion. He made his way down the stairwell, but once the 78th floor, he said he had a choice to take the elevator or continue down the stairs. Knowing a bit about fire safety, he took the stairs. I was a very, very fortunate man, he said. It wasn't until he reached the lobby of the tower that he saw the scope of what had happened. On the ground, he saw twisted steel, crumbled concrete, and big red markings on the ground. But it's not those images that keep him up at night, Ditmar said. It's the sounds of screams. The sounds of hundreds of thousands of people all screaming the same scream on the streets of New York as the South Tower came down. That's the sound I hear first thing in the morning and last thing at night, he said. It wasn't until 7 hours later he was able to reach his wife back home in Illinois by phone. It was one of the greatest phone calls of my life, the father of 4 said. 20 years later, Ditmar says the events of September 11th, 2001 need to be remembered. It's my obligation to tell the story, he said. The memories and things we saw and felt that day, they come back to us, particularly this time every year, he said. He still goes back to New York City for business and commemoration of the attacks. I cry every time, he said. The tears are for the people who lost their lives, who should have survived, he said. As a final thought, Ditmar encourages Americans to live life to the fullest, even during times of hardship or tragedy. You can't take any day for granted, he said. That was from an article written by Kristen Z. and Kayla Galloway on ABC News, where they interviewed a survivor of the 9/11 terrorist attacks. Thank you for joining us again on the 911 Strong podcast on this special 20-year anniversary episode of the 911 Strong podcast as we remember the events of 9/11. With me, as always, is my co-host, Kristen Jauregui.
Hey, guys.
So, as I'm reading this, I get the chills. I think
Same.
Everybody gets when, you remember the events vividly. I remember the videos.
Yeah.
I remember people jumping out of the
Yeah.
floors because they didn't want, they'd rather jump to their deaths as opposed to die while burning.
Yeah.
And those are some tough decisions that you and I don't think about, but they had to make.
Yeah.
And then you hear some of the stories of people that should have been there, but for whatever reason, their car broke down that day.
Or they overslept.
Yeah. And it's just so tragic. And I think a lot of the survivors or the people that had near escapes or they share similar stories as Mr. Ditmar did here.
Yeah.
Some people call it survivor's remorse. And even though I can't believe it's been 20 years. It feels so fresh.
I know.
Do you remember where you were at when this happened?
Yeah, I was a few months pregnant with Chaselyn, and I was in Las Vegas just visiting, actually. And I didn't turn on the news, but I had gone downstairs and eating breakfast, and I overheard people saying that they started shutting down certain buildings in Las Vegas because the U.S. was under attack. And I'm like, what are they talking about? And then we were able to get to a TV and see what was happening and immediately turned around and came home. So, and then just listening to the news live as all the additional planes were going down around the country.
Yeah, I think a lot of people remember the towers being hit, but people forget sometimes that the Pentagon was also hit.
Yeah.
And then there was another plane that was actually taken down by the passengers.
Yes.
The hijackers had taken over this plane, and the passengers all rallied together. I think they knew that this was
Yeah.
a suicide mission,
Yeah.
but they wanted to save the lives of the target.
Yeah.
And
They
they stepped
succeeded.
up. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the famous line from that cockpit recording or phone recording was, "Let's roll."
Yeah.
And every time I hear that, I think so much patriotism,
Yes.
humanity, and we're missing a lot of that today, 20 years later, aren't we?
I think we are, but obviously that with what's going on today, there's still a lot of patriots out there that are going above and beyond than what our government is doing currently.
Yeah. I think it's sad that it takes an event like what happened in Afghanistan to bring our country together.
Yeah.
Because one of the things I remember about 9/11 was immediately right after 9/12.
Oh, yeah.
It was the country came together.
Yes, we're all one team.
Yeah. And the people that were critical against George Bush Jr., when he stood up on that rubble in his field jacket and hard hat and megaphone and addressed the people, it reminded me a lot of that scene where the president from Independence Day, that movie,
Oh, yeah.
came and rallied around. A lot of people didn't like him because he was young and whatnot, or his character was. But the country really rallied together and came under one umbrella, and
Yeah.
inevitably George W. Bush was the right guy at the time to bring that country together. And I think right now, as critical as people are about this president, I think that's what's absent right now. He really had an opportunity to step up and join this country together, but instead he's kind of avoiding questions and avoiding the hard questions, especially.
Not kinda, he is. He's
Yeah.
turning his back and walking away.
Yeah, and instead, when he does take the opportunity to address the nation, it's for his own personal agenda.
Yes.
So it's pissing off a lot of people.
Rightfully so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, the way he handled the soldiers that came back.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. We watched it live at work.
Yeah. So I think that's the main difference right now. Not to get
Yeah.
political or anything, but I think if you take this tragedy, and obviously the magnitude is a little different. Many more civilians died in 9/11 than this. But we are approaching. We're in September. As we're recording this, we're nearing the anniversary of 9/11. And Kristen shared a little bit about what she remembered. I was already a deputy. I was in my first year, actually in my second year as a deputy sheriff. I was at work, huddled around the TV, chomping on a breakfast burrito with the rest of the guys, my team. And we huddled around a 25-inch tube TV, and we see breaking news. And I remember thinking, oh, wow, what a tragic accident.
Right, yeah.
Nobody suspected it was a terror attack.
Well, yeah, that wouldn't be, because it's so out of the norm that, yeah.
We feel
that's
so
all you
secure.
can think. Yeah, like who would attack the U.S.?
Exactly, on our soil.
Yes.
Especially in the mainland. And then I think back to, imagine what the people felt at Pearl Harbor.
Yeah.
They're in paradise. They're in Hawaii, and they're in the best
Same thing. Yeah.
place military personnel could be. It's like, hey, you have to be stationed anywhere, but Hawaii,
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think that movie Pearl Harbor, that opening scene, portrayed it perfectly. And people are out there hanging their linens, and kids are playing, and all of a sudden,
it's business as usual.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for a lot of the people that passed up at the towers, and on that heroic plane flight that they took down, it was a regular day for them.
Yeah, I didn't finish watching it. There's, I don't know how many episodes, but there's a new documentary on, I believe, Netflix about 9/11. And so we just started watching the first episode and talking about, just carrying on as normal. There's one lady that they're interviewing in the beginning, and she was in the second tower.
Yeah.
And so she saw what happened in the first tower, and they're like, oh gosh, how horrible. And they didn't even think about evacuating initially, and then her mom just happened to call her and say, you're going to go, right? She's like, okay, I'll go for you, Mom. And because of that, she was one of the last ones on that particular elevator to get out before the second plane hit.
That's crazy. I mean,
I'm getting chills just talking about it. But yeah.
I mean, it makes you think. It's like, what do you do if you're in that situation? Obviously, this guy, Mr. Ditmar, had the presence of mind to take the stairs and not the elevator.
Right.
And we know now that the elevator shafts were the main avenue and where the jet fuel rose
Right.
up. And the stairs are fire protected. A
Yeah.
lot of people don't think that because a lot of people don't take the stairs.
Yes.
But the stairs, they have firewalls, fire doors, and they're fire protected. And it makes you think, preparation is key. Not that we want to think
It's going to ever happen again,
right,
but
but it can.
But
And-
just in general thing, like if something were to happen or the building just decides to give, or if there's an earthquake or something like that, that's always another thing to think about too.
Yeah, look at the condo complex in Florida. That whole
Yeah.
facade just collapsed.
Yeah.
Yeah, something to think about. Well, just some facts from 9/11. A lot of people, including myself, didn't know, but this was something compiled by the History Channel. September, on that day, nearly 3,000 people were killed. 400 were police officers and firefighters. And to this day, a lot of the firefighters and rescue workers are dying from a very rare form of cancer
Yes.
that is unique to the wreckage
Of
at
9/11.
9/11. Yeah, very, very sad.
Yeah.
I didn't know this, but 9/11 was not the first terrorist attack at the World Trade Center. Did you know
Right.
that?
Yeah.
A bombing in February of 1993 killed 6 people.
Yeah. I think they were practicing one in LA too, which is what one of the planes was sent towards LA for.
Oh.
So they kind of like test their targets beforehand.
Right. Yeah, and it could have very well been LA.
I think that one of the planes was, whether that was their actual destination,
Right.
but that's where the plane's destination was LA.
We mentioned this, but the passengers aboard United Flight 93 heard about the previous airplane attacks and attempted to retake control of the plane from the hijackers. As a result, the hijackers deliberately crashed the plane in Pennsylvania Field instead of at their unknown target, which is still unknown to this day. Nobody knows what their actual target was. I'm thinking, the other big thing on the East Coast is probably the White House.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. While the accounts of the World Trade Center attack aired immediately, there was no video footage of the Pentagon attack that was publicly released until 2006, 5 years later. Interesting.
Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, and that's why there's a lot of conspiracy theorists out there that believe that it was a missile and all that stuff because they were so reluctant to put the
Yeah.
footage out there.
Yeah.
Okay, the World Trade Center on 9/11 the attack on the World Trade Center on 9/11 resulted in the largest loss of life by a foreign attack on American soil. So,
Yeah.
that's, let's see, 18 people were rescued alive from the rubble of the World Trade Center, and I didn't think anybody was rescued
No, I
alive.
remember the dogs rescuing some people.
Oh, okay. Mm-hmm. Those dogs were heroes, too.
They were. They actually have a section dedicated to them at the Memorial Museum for all the dogs that helped.
And speaking of the memorial and the museum, in 2019, the U.S. Senate passed a bill ensuring that a fund to compensate victims of the September 11th attack never runs out of money, and that first responders won't have to return to Congress to plead for more funding. They got one thing right.
That part of it. But I think they're still struggling to get funding for the cancer that they're getting from
Right.
it. So they need to work on that part of it because they deserve compensation.
Yeah, like I said, 20 years later, and we're still fighting battles that should have been settled 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And man, I mean, it's the Pearl Harbor of our lifetime, right? I know people from that generation remember that vividly. And there wasn't even the avenues of information that exist today. Like we have live TV, we have
Everything at our
internet.
fingertips.
And over there, people, unless you had a radio,
Yeah.
you didn't know about it till the next day or the day after when you got your
Right.
paper. But I mean, at the rate information exchanges now, you would think we'd have better intel. There's some people that believe that something big is going to happen because it's the 9/11 20th anniversary, and then the events in Afghanistan, have brought up more of the conspiracy theorists. But I think there is some validity there. I think people have to be very vigilant.
Yeah.
I remember in the days after 9/11, and I know you remember this because you were working the call center. You got a lot of calls about
Yeah.
suspicious people, right?
Yes, we did.
And you think that's going to come up again? Has that happened yet?
You know what? It hasn't happened yet. I I don't know why, but no, I haven't gotten any calls like I did before. I don't know if it's just because the generation's different
Yeah.
now, and they really don't feel the impact with what happened in Afghanistan as much because it happened over there and it's not here.
Right.
So they weren't directly affected, the younger generation.
Yeah.
I think they just really don't grasp what it all means.
Speaking of the younger generation, this one kind of hit me. So after Afghanistan, after the soldiers and Marines died in Afghanistan, our good friend Officer Daniels sent me a text message with this young man's photo. But his name is Hunter, and he was one of the, he was a corpsman, I think, so he was in the Navy, but he was attached to a Marine Corps regiment. He sent me his profile, and I thought this was really funny. It just says, Hunter, real G's move in silence like lasagna. He's, pointing out the fact that the G in lasagna is silent. And he was part of a special ops group that was part of the mission to rescue people in Afghanistan. And I didn't know Hunter, but he followed me.
Yeah.
And that's what Officer Daniels pointed out. And that he had the opportunity to meet him in Washington, D.C. a few years ago, and he looked up to all of us. He wanted to be a police officer.
Yeah.
So I did a little research. Turns out his mom and dad were both deputies with Riverside. His dad's a captain, Riverside County Sheriff's. And he, in fact, was an explorer with the Riverside County Sheriff's. Right. And his dream was, when he finally got out of the military, was to become an officer. And I think we take that for granted, being officers now. I mean, I sit here and getting a little emotional thinking about it out of guilt. But we can sit here and complain about our jobs, as we do sometimes, and working conditions, or the fact that we have to work holidays. And here's a guy named Hunter that fought so heroically for our country, and all he wanted to do was become a police officer, so he can complain the same way I'm complaining now.
Yeah.
And I think I'm a little guilt-stricken because he never got the opportunity to do the things that you and I take for granted. And it does hit close to home. I don't know him. I don't know his parents.
Yeah.
But I know that he was just down the road. And, who am I for him to look up to? He's a guy that I look up to.
Yeah.
And I think heroes like him and the 12 others that heroically passed and were unable to engage because of politics and handcuffing was really tragic.
Yeah.
So, to honor them, I'd like to recognize the 13 brave. A lot of them were local. You had a celebration in the city you lived in for one of your local.
Yeah. One of them went to school with my daughter.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
So.
They were all babies
Yeah.
when we experienced 9/11.
So wherever you are right now listening to this, take a moment and, out of respect for our brave military personnel, take a moment to listen as these names of our fallen military personnel are being read.
Marine Corps Lance Corporal David L. Espinoza of Rio Bravo, Texas. Marine Corps Sergeant Nicole L. G. of Sacramento, California. Marine Corps Staff Sergeant Darren T. Hoover. U.S. Army Staff Sergeant Brian C. Naus of Corrington, Tennessee. Marine Corps Corporal Hunter Lopez of Indio, California. Marine Corps Lance Corporal Riley J. McCollum of Jackson, Wyoming. Marine Corps Lance Corporal Dylan R. Marola of Rancho Cucamonga, California. Marine Corps Lance Corporal Kareem M. Nicoy of Norco, California. Marine Corps Corporal Deegan West Page, W. Page of Omaha, Nebraska. Marine Corps Sergeant Joanny Rosario Pichardo of Lawrence, Massachusetts. Marine Corps Corporal Humberto A. Sanchez of Logansport, Indiana. Marine Corps Lance Corporal Jared M. Schmitz of St. Charles, Missouri, and Navy Hospitalman Maxton W. Sobek of Berlin Heights, Ohio. These are our most recent 13 heroes, and no day shall erase you from the memory of time.
Amen. May your names live on forever. And as long as this podcast is on the air, your names will be out there on our podcast. And we thank you for your service.
We can't thank you enough.
And we don't deserve the sacrifice that you made, but are forever grateful. Thank you for joining us on this special episode of the 911 Strong podcast. God bless you and God bless your families. Take care.